I think in the past couple of weeks, perhaps not last week, but recently, in the recent week, we emphasized a few important points. One is that we started to introduce certain features of humanistic psychology and humanistic psychotherapy, and show how, as Buddhists, we can gain some insight from these kind of so-called modern disciplines, but at the same time emphasizing that any comparative understanding and study between a modern thought system and Buddhism must be based on the perspective of Buddhism, not the other way around. Buddhism must be the basis. It's not the case of trying to fit Buddhism into modern system and to justify Buddhism in that way, to even distort Buddhism that way, but it is trying to understand from the Buddhist perspective certain thoughts by modern thinkers, and to see whether we can find some parallels, whether we can benefit from their analysis of human existence and human problems and their solution and so on. This is what we have been doing, although not in a very systematic way, because this kind of sharing, as I've said many times, are not intentionally systematic, and it's basically a kind of impromptu sharing, without mostly without preparation, but straight from the heart, as it were. And because I believe that this is the way that that Dhamma was taught in ancient time, not in a formal way, mostly not in a formal way at least. The other point we made was about approach here in our little center, Buddha-Dharma Center, in the courses that we conduct. And I believe that we must try to practice what we talk about, what we say regarding the integration of Buddhist studies and Buddhist practice. And I personally believe that these two can be integrated. They need not be mutually exclusive. They should not be mutually exclusive. And that is to say that in studying Buddhism, in studying even the Pali language or the text or other languages or other doctrines of different schools, not just the Pali school, not just Theravada Buddhism, because this center and my personal approach is non-sectarian. In all these so-called academic studies, we certainly should learn in a rigorous intellectual manner, and to understand doctrines, to understand languages, to understand historical development and so on. But at the same time, we must always try to see what we can gain in terms of applying the Buddha's Dharma, Buddha's teaching in our own life. Whether we can find meaning as Buddhists, even as Buddhist scholars, as Buddhist students in our studies. So the ideal then, it's not the ideal that can be easily fully materialized, but I think to a considerable degree, I think we are, I hope that we are fairly successful, and that's what we are doing. And certainly in my own courses, and in the past few years, I started teaching the Buddha's discourses from the Pali, directly from the Pali, and expounding them in a manner that I hope that the student can relate also to their life as well. And I emphasize that each session should be experienced like this, not just a classroom learning, not just an intellectual learning for your exam, not just to make sure that there are enough, a large number of students and, and success in that way, but each session must be taken as a spiritual experience, at least as much as possible. And we should be able to derive Dharma joy, great joy, inspiration from this kind of study. And every time we should be able to take back something to think, and something that perhaps can be lasting in our mind as a source of inspiration from the Buddha. Well, at least this is what I am trying to do myself, and you can see how my classes are being conducted. In the past 2-3 weeks, we have emphasized on the Buddha's teaching as a system of creative transformation, as a system of creative education. And this year I have chosen to begin to start with the topic of spiritual fellowship, Kalyana Mittata. And there are so many, discourses we can take, and from different point of view, from the intellectual point of view, from the linguistic point of view, from the point of view of learning Pali and familiarity with the Buddha's teaching material of the Buddha's suttas and so on. But I hope you can sense that my criteria for selection is in terms of the inspiration that we can get from the Buddha's teaching, that hopefully can be transformative, that can be felt, that can be experienced as transformative. So this year also, we started with the whole topic of spiritual fellowship, and we saw that the Buddha emphasized that spiritual fellowship was the whole of the spiritual life. And this is in response to Ananda's profound exclamation that spiritual fellowship was half of the spiritual life. They said, no, don't say so, it's not half, it's the entirety of the spiritual life. And then the Buddha went on to elaborate how, in what way it is the whole of the spiritual life. And we saw basically that the gist of what we read in the Kalyana Sutta is that when we have a true spiritual friend, we are supported, we are inspired to practice the Dhamma. To practice, for instance, the Noble Eightfold Path. And that way, we are finally led to the full unfoldment of our human potential. And further, the Buddha also interpreted and make it understand in terms of taking him, the Buddha himself, as a spiritual friend par excellence. This is much like in the later Prajna Paramita tradition. Prajna Paramita, that is the perfection, the wisdom perfection, is emphasized as the spiritual friend par excellence. So, in the early phase, in the sutta, in the Pali Sutta, we see the Buddha emphasizing this perspective of understanding the importance of spiritual friend by pointing out that in reliance on him as the spiritual friend, we are led to transcend birth and death, to transcend all dukkhas. So spiritual friendship is as important as that. So we often forget that, especially in a westernized, a modernized society. Last night I emphasized again that basically today when we talk about modernization, we really mean westernizations. It's so much, in the fabric of our whole nowadays Eastern culture in a country, for instance, like Hong Kong, everywhere. It doesn't mean that you have to go to the West, you have to study in a Western university. I happen to have the chance to do that, but and I interacted with many Westerner as a young man, as an undergraduate and so on. So I know what it's like, but one doesn't have to go to the West. One doesn't even have to join a Western university. And, say for instance in Hong Kong, you open your books, you go to your school, it can even be a Chinese school, and you open the newspapers, you read your novels, all these things actually, full of, are based on, if you like, Western conditionings, Western cultures, and the system in our work, the departments we go to, the companies we go to, basically are model on the Western system. So it's in the fabric of our life, of the whole society. You can't escape it. And of course, there are positive aspects. I don't say that everything Western or modernized is bad. And there's no reason to be antagonistic in that way to the modern systems or even to the whole process of westernization, but we must have more awareness. This is one of my emphasis, consistent emphasis throughout the years here. And I think it deserves to be repeated often enough. So we must have more awareness of this. And so while there are advantages, while there are the good aspects of a modern system, a Western system, there are also serious, very serious damage to the Asian psyche, if you like, Asian psychology. And that's why there are, I believe, that is one reason, one important reason why Asians are having so many problems. And they talk about problems in Western terms. And sometimes they problematize their life. When there are no problems from their own culture, they import the problem from the West along with the Western conditioning, Western value structure. This is very unfortunate. And young people also think that they are smart when they start reading English books, and they can quote, their favorite writers and their favorite, ideas I've read in the books, and they are so much convinced that they begin to reinterpret their experiences in the Eastern culture in terms of the Western culture, and they get into problems. Suddenly they begin to suffer. But they think they are smarter than their fellow Asians who have not been able to read in English or have not been able to have access to such literature. One of the negative features, there's so many that I've said on so many occasions. One in this context is individualism. And people tend to be aloof in the Western or modern culture, and they think that they are more important as individuals than others. And this ego thing is so strong and so damaging. And as a result, there are problems for themselves as also problems for others. And in terms of practices as Buddhists also, you see that many people are very self-centered, and in the sense that they think that their own practices are better, and they don't want to mix with others. And even if they join a particular group, and they want to run away quickly, and they just say hello to you, and they don't even have time to put their hands together, and they run away, and they think that they spend their time better at home, maybe close the door and worship the Buddha that way, Of course, we need relative privacy also, and seclusion is also one factor emphasized in Buddhist practice, certainly. But what I'm emphasizing is that they miss the Buddha's emphasis on spiritual fellowship. If we can only grow, in the context of spiritual fellowship. Now, I pointed out Carl Rogers' idea of the environment. He said that basically self-actualization really can work, can be experienced given the proper environment. And this includes the environment of acceptance by your fellow beings, understanding and support and encouragement by your fellow beings. And in Buddhism, we will say that this is the context of spiritual fellowship. And that's why we spend time, we spend energy for such a session every Sunday. And sometimes people think, I know your ideas, I've listened once or twice, that's enough, and or I can read books or listen to tapes better at home, So they miss the whole point. This is the modern approach. Once again, modern conditioning. The Asians are more communal in that way. They are more together in that way. You go to an Asian village, you see their families, their relatives, and they are together. They feel very much for the, for the family and for the relatives, and for the villages. And today, as you can see, in a modern context, like for instance Hong Kong, you don't even know who your neighbors are. All doors are closed. You don't want to know them, And your relatives, you may see them once a year, by way of customs, but there's hardly any feeling and sharing. Suddenly, it was not the case, say, in my own case, in my childhood, and we share our feeling very much with our relatives, with our neighbors. And often we eat in our neighbor's house, in our relative's house, and they also eat in our house, and so on. You see. Although we are not rich people, we are poor people basically, but we share like this. We feel happy that way. But when we are being modernized or westernized, unfortunately, this beautiful culture is disappearing. And so certainly we have to understand in the context of the importance of spiritual fellowship. Even in the case of the monk, the important and the spiritually achieved monks like Sariputta, Ananda, Moggallana, and all the great disciples, you see that they have the spiritual fellowship among themselves. They live together, they move together, and the Buddha also always had an attendant on him, not only because of his physical need, like when he feel tired, when he feel thirsty, he has someone to make tea for him perhaps. But of course, I'm using modern term, but there's no making of tea even in the case of Buddha time. Maybe he was able to have some water served on him, and someone will prepare the seat for him to lie down when he has, headache or he has pain. And nowadays, sometimes we feel that we don't have someone to talk to when we have a physical problem, for instance. Even though there are people living near you, even in the same house. So, but in the case of the Buddha, he always moved with his attendant and with a few monks together. This is the case of an enlightened being, enlightened mind. Because he lives, although his mind had transcended attachment, entanglement, and so on, but his, if you like, his chemical composition, his physical bodies, are still subject to laws of space-time. That's why he has stomachache, and he died, or he said to have died of stomach ache. And sometimes he would like to talk to someone. He would like to share his feelings of someone. In the Buddha's teaching, we have a certain genre of Buddha Vachana, words of the Buddha, in the form of inspirational sayings. And sometimes the Buddha didn't wait for someone to ask him, please teach me this and teach me that, explain this, explain that. Sometimes he expects that, and he feels happy he can share that, But sometimes he felt inspired, he just wanted to share it, and he just uttered verses. These are called for instance, we have the Udana in that way. The inspirational sayings that come spontaneously from the Buddha. He just wants to share. This is the enlightened mind in his experience of no selfness. It's not that no selfness means that he doesn't have to care about anybody because there's nobody to be cared for. It's not like this. In his experience of no selfness, he in that very experience, he experiences the oneness of mankind. In him, everything is shared, is to be shared. In Mahayana, particularly, there's emphasis on transcendence of merit, and also, of course, in the rejoicing of merit. This is not just in Mahayana, also in Theravada. And this is an important aspect of spiritual fellowship. Spiritual fellowship is the experience of sharing, and we must learn. Even I feel happy if I can share my Dhamma like right now, you see. And when I have a chance to teach in that way, it's not for the mere sake of teaching and keeping the classes going, or to get my salary for my teaching or my job. It's not like that. Or to get my little center going. And many people don't understand that. People even who support me, they don't understand this, And the sharing of Dhamma is our mission. It's very important. That's why I don't care even if a class has only 2 or 3 people, and I want it to go on. I don't think of, spending so much money for 2, 3 people. If I'm not able to spend the fund, of course, that's a different matter. It's a question of survival. But when I can do it, I don't think in terms of number. I don't think so in terms of if you like, this kind of formal advantages of profit. I think in terms of the importance of sharing the Dhamma. If a teacher can teach something and at least there are 4 or 5 people there to share and to learn something, that's my mission. If I have money, I spend for that. These days, these months, I'm traveling between China and Hong Kong. Just imagine how much we have to pay. But fortunately, in recent months, Buddha-Dharma Center is also reimbursing my air tickets, at least in most cases. But everybody knows that at the beginning, in the earlier stage, I had to spend my own money. But I don't think like that. If they pay me so much, then I have to deduct so much every now and then to go and come, and then very little is left. I don't think in terms of that kind of formal, that kind of commercial way. I feel happy that if I can go there and share it and then come back and then do my work here. Again, not as a formal job. My life now, I have only maybe 10 years, 12 years left. Have to be shared. And that's how I've maintained the meaning of my existence. So before I close my eyes permanently, if I can help someone or some people, in their understanding, in their studies of Buddhism, I'll do it, if it is worthwhile. So you can see that in the case of the Buddha, suddenly this sharing aspect, even as an enlightened being, is extremely important. Of course, sharing doesn't mean the bigger the number, the better. The bigger the organization, the better. The Sangha started with 5 members, and he wanted to share with at least these 5 fellow practitioners. He felt encouraged. He felt supported morally, and he was able to struggle on, you see, in his own way. But eventually, even these 5 misunderstandings left him. He still had to continue. But after his enlightenment, he remembered these 5. He wanted to share his insight, his enlightenment with these 5. And that's how he started the Sangha. It's not the number. And as the Sangha grew, as the Sangha became bigger and bigger, today the Sangha is not only confined to India. So there's not much Buddhism left in India, although happily there's some revival. And I want to see that. That's why I'm trying to help the Indian Buddhists because of that feeling. I don't think in terms of, I do like that, I'm losing some money on behalf of Buddha-Dharma Center. Now I'm, for instance, I'm actively trying to give a chance to a small group of Indian monks who come and study Dhamma here. If Buddha-Dharma cannot find the money, I'll find it. If I have problems to go with, say, immigration, I'll fight with them. If I can, of course. So I don't think in terms of those formalities. It's the sharing that's very important. Anyway, so coming back here also, this is our mission. And we want to share the Dhamma. And last week we continue with a new sutta, or rather actually it's last night, not last week. We had another class, and I thought it was appropriate to select another sutta from the Majjhima. This sutta is called the Bhadāli Sutta, because it illustrates how the Buddha was the spiritual friend par excellence, how the spiritual friend's inspiration is so important, and how that kind of spiritual fellowship transforms us. And it is in the context of that kind of spiritual fellowship that spiritual transformation becomes possible. I think that sutta is one of those suttas that can be very helpful in our understanding. So I told my student to read and to understand, to study with me as a spiritual experience. Not to come to class, especially with preconceived notion that, those basic stuff, you emphasize spiritual fellowship, you have done that, you have said that last week, that's enough, It's not that. I have listened to Pali Sutta, that's enough. It's not that. Each time it must be a sharing experience. And that sharing experience can be inspiring not only for the listener, but also for the speaker, for the teacher also. It should be like this. This is the spirit of Sangha. Well, I was talking about the India, now my memory is not so good now, because when I drink on, I forget what I was saying at the beginning. Now I was trying to say that as the Sangha grew in India, it became very big and it spread throughout India. The Sangha became very, very big. But notice that it didn't become big in the Western sense. It's not a huge organization. Like, for instance, unfortunately, we have to make the comparison with, say, Catholicism. It's not a huge church throughout the world, and then it's completely structured under a hierarchical structure. You have the highest, it's the supreme authority, that is the Pope, and then the Archbishop, and then the Bishop, and then who else? I forgot the officers, and then, It's an authoritarian structure, and that's why I said that the humanistic thought system, humanistic Buddhist humanistic psychotherapy is similar to Buddhism in the sense that Buddhism, like a humanistic, like what is emphasized in humanistic psychology or psychotherapy, is not an authoritarian structure, should not be authoritarian structure. So even in India also, at that time, when the Sangha became very, very big, and throughout India, it never became big in the Western authority, in the sense of or pattern on the Western type of authoritarian hierarchy. Not like that. It's a natural development of a network of spiritual communities, and this spiritual community actually ideally should not be too big. Each one should not be too big, but you can have a huge network, but they're all basically sizable spiritual communities. And in a spiritual communities, you have members who are all trying to grow spiritually, who are spiritual friends, who have the same purpose, who share the same commitment. And in ancient time, when there are some serious disagreement, say in a big group of monks, and when this disagreement cannot be resolved, and they split into two different groups, and then it developed that way. It was never a huge superimposed hierarchical structure. But of course, even with the Buddha's emphasis in ancient time, eventually, of course, and this is not the fault of the Dhamma or not of Buddha, but actually it is the fault of the negative conditioning within the human psychology. And now, as far as that is concerned, of course, you can't blame the Westerners, because at that time there was no Western model to condition the influences. But it was within India, when this happened, and actually sometimes the ideals of a spiritual community tended to be lost, at least partially lost, and they became a hierarchy. They became, at least in some cases, at least relatively. And then problems began. Problems multiplied. As only when there were problems in that way that there needed to be legislation, needed to be rules, so-called training rules. But I keep on emphasizing to you that we have to understand the very nature of Buddhist idea of sila, idea of discipline. And yesterday I repeated that last night. It's very different in nature, very different in purpose from what we understand, what we see in authoritarian hierarchy. It must be different. If it is not different, then we don't have Buddhism. We may have beautiful, huge organization, powerful, rich, well-known, but all these are representation of spiritual decline of the Sangha. So I said often that to the extent that we see more and more rules, stipulated in the Sangha, the so-called Vinaya rules, and more and more systematization, we actually, in a sense, we are already witnessing the gradual spiritual decline of the Sangha. And I'm going to share with you in this sutta later, not today, we don't have time, the important question that was asked by Bhadāli, and the Buddha answered. Basically, he said that the Buddha asked, Bhadāli asked, how come in ancient time, in previous time, there were little rules or no rule, but there were more arahats and more spiritually achieved teachers. But today, that he was referring to the Buddha's time in a relatively later period, not today in the 22nd century or 21st century, not like that. No. He said that now there are so many rules now. Sangha have become bigger, but there's very few people who have gained, spiritual attainment. How is that? Why is that? Then the Buddha answered him, and one of the factors the Buddha brought out is when the Sangha become big in that sense, in the sense of a hierarchical structure, in the sense of organization, then there need to be more rules, and then there will be less, at the same time, less spiritual attainment. The Buddha himself said that in his time. So imagine that, something like more than 2,000 years from his time today, and also with the additional influence of this Western conditioning, how the situation is. So we have to be very aware. So we emphasize the awareness of the difference between a spiritual community on the one hand and the so-called group in the formal sense on the other. Now this distinction is, I don't claim it is made for me, and we have to give credit to some great thinkers, and particularly, for instance, Venerable Sangharashita, who very systematically emphasized the difference between the group and the spiritual community. But in brief, in a group, there is this group consciousness, the herd consciousness. You want to conform. You want to adhere, with a mentality of obedience, and you want to develop bigger and bigger, in the group, and you want to make the group more powerful. Now, this is the tendency of what I call the lower evolution. That's how the species become bigger and bigger. Human species become more and more successful on Earth compared to other species. This is a group. The humankind is one of the best exemplifications of what is called a group in that sense. And the group is, if you like, an essential feature of the group mentality. It's an essential feature of the biological evolution. But on the other hand, spiritual evolution, high evolution, requires true individual. Now, this is not individualism that I talked about just now, not egotisticism that I talked about just now, not self-centeredness that I talked about just now, and less still selfishness, but through being true individuals. And in brief, a spiritual community, like the ideal of the Sangha, is one where you have true individuals, or people who are at least trying to be true individuals. And they associate together not because of fear, not because of herd consciousness, not because of obedience. Of course there is obedience, but obedience in a very spontaneous, natural way. There is, of course, authority. The Buddha is the highest authority, but authority not in the sense of authority or power over others, but a natural, spontaneous authority. And sometimes the Buddha has to maintain that. Without that, you cannot help, you cannot guide others. But it's not the type of authority, structural based authority. So these are the essential differences between a group and spirit community. I have already talked about this on other occasions, and we cannot branch off to give too much details. But this is to say that even in the case of India, when Buddhism developed that way, it become bigger and bigger, and in spite of there being human problems and problems of organization, institutionalization, but still the ideal is maintained that the Sangha can be big in the sense of a network, but a network of small spiritual communities. In each spiritual community, there are spiritual friends who are mutually supportive of each other in respect of spiritual growth. And everybody tries to be a true individual, but at the same time, and sharing the humanity within each person on the path of the unfoldment of the human potential, on the path of struggle towards Buddhahood together. So coming back to the Bhadāli Sutta, we see many things. One of the things is how the Buddha, as a creative teacher, how he teaches, how he helps Bhadāli, this monk, to change, to transform, not by force, but by inspiration. This is one thing. And we also see how in ancient time these rules came into being. Not because of a structure and then somebody sits down and say, I'm the highest authority. Then I mean, make 500 rules or 1,000 rules, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10. Then 10 each divided by another 10, and each one is another 10. Then you have set the rules, and then superimposed as a structure, and to ensure that nobody rebel against you, to ensure the so-called smooth functioning, so-called efficiency. These are things that I emphasize in any modern institution, but certainly not in the case of the Sangha. So we see in this sutta how rules came to being. In brief, I also have mentioned on other occasions, we see that in the case of the Vinaya, it is said that for 20 years or 12 years, there was not a single rule at the beginning. Then we wonder how how the Sangha went on harmoniously, how they solved the problems. Surely it can't be that in ancient time all ancient people are, as human beings, they are better in nature than modern human nature is the same, Our greed, hatred, ignorance are the same in ancient time as in modern time. Just that we manifest this form in different forms. Sometimes certain problem of ours, so-called problem of ours, become problem because of the way we interpret them. Especially because of the way we interpret them, basing on Western conditioning, we see them as problems. When they were not problems for instance, in a certain Asian culture, like Buddhism, for instance. So it's not that. But then, how could they carry on and how could the Sangha grow without any rules? Well, if you think carefully, if you observe, and you can certainly see that, for instance, in the case of discourses like the Bhadāli Sutta, it is through Buddha's inspiration. In the Buddha's time, there were problems, and you have the famous Chabagi in the group. It's a group of 6 monks. They're very, 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 very naughty monks, and they were rebellious, and they were creating problems all the time, and disobeying, and not only disobeying, but deliberately creating troubles. And this is in the time of the Buddha. And then, of course, you have the example of Devadatta. There are so many problems in the Buddha's time also, And there are people who try to accuse the Buddha also for things the Buddha had not done, or the Sangha had not done. So coming back to within the spiritual community then, problems are solved. They're not really solved, they were resolved, if you like. Problems of greed, hatred, ignorance are still there at their level. But the monks, if you like, are inspired and lifted to a higher level, if you like, through the inspiration of the Buddha. And when the Sangha grow too big and the Buddha is not able to inspire directly, or the spiritual advanced disciples are not able to guide directly, inspire directly, there needed to be some rules in that sense, as guidelines. They are always guidelines, they're not commandments. This is another point that I have emphasized, right? And so this became a necessity. So even some organization became a necessity if you want to even spread the Buddha's message in the modern world, for instance. But we mustn't have superimposed structure first. You mustn't think of how to develop this as an institution. Make bigger and bigger, more and more. No, it's not. That's a wrong approach. But you have to think, if I do like this, I need certain minimum organization, minimum efficiency. But as it develops, I need further organization. But the organization should be proportional to the actual need, and only to the extent to cope with the need of society, maybe the government requirement, the university requirement, and so on. Societal expectation. And there's some parts of it, some dimension of it, even in the Vinaya. The Vinaya recommendation also partly, at least to some extent, based on consideration of societal interaction, how society looks at the Sangha, for instance, and so on. So in ancient time, the rule, one after another, came to be as it were laid down, when in fact an actual incident, an actual problem occurred, according to the Vinaya, including the most serious rule of association with women, for instance, and all these offenses that took place, because they actually took place, and then there was a real need for the Buddha to say, well, now look, in order to help you people from now on, you mustn't behave like this, you mustn't act like this, and this became a rule. So one rule after another, one rule after. Today we have hundreds of rules. So in all Vinaya traditions, all means not only Theravada, only Pali, but we have several Vinaya traditions preserved in, for instance, in Chinese, and some in Sanskrit, in Tibetan. All tradition tells us that for the first 12 or 20 years, mostly said 12 years, there was no rule, no organization in that way. Everything just was carried on in a natural, spontaneous way, and that's because of the inspiration of Buddha. That is the key point we have to bear in mind. The Buddhist system, the Dhamma system, is a system of inspiration. Creative education should be based on inspiration. So we see it in the Bhadāli Suttas. And, in the Sutta, now we have spent a lot of time, so I have to be a bit brief. The Buddha announced the training rule of eating at one sitting. Eka asana bhajanam. Bhojanam. That means, basically it means you eat once a day. So how did the Buddha introduce or recommend the rule? He didn't impose it as a commandment. One day he told the bhikkhus, he said, "Oh bhikkhus, look, in my case, I eat like this, only at one sitting, only once a day, and I felt very light in my body and mind. I felt very little affliction in my mind, in my body. I felt healthy. And I am in a state of ease and comfort for my spiritual practice and spiritual faring. So you bhikkhus also should do like this." And he was making a recommendation to the monks. Yeah? And as he was doing that, one monk, his name is Bhadāli, stood up and said, "Venerable Sir, I'm sorry, I cannot do that. I shall not try to do that." And he gave his reasons. He was given a chance to explain himself. He said, "If I do that, there would be kucha, and it will be vipatisaro. These two words basically means regret or remorse. But the first word is very interesting, and I said it has, I think it has importance for those who are interested in Buddhist psychology and Buddhist therapy. Kucha, kaukritya in Sanskrit, in the Abhidhamma came to be emphasized as an indeterminate dharma. In other words, that kind of remorse that is not necessarily unwholesome, but is not also necessarily wholesome. It depends on the case. So the idea is, if you do something that is skillful and wholesome, and later on you regret it, then that kind of regret will be negative, will be damaging. Supposing you have helped someone and you regret, I shouldn't have done like that, I shouldn't have helped him that way, it's bad for me, then the spiritual benefit that you derive from having helped the person become negated, become destroyed. On the other hand, if you have done something unwholesome and you regret it, I shouldn't have done like that because it's not wholesome, it's not spiritually helpful, and then that kind of regret will be helpful, will be wholesome. So that's called kucha, kaukritya. So Bhadāli said, Venerable Sir, if I do like that, if I eat like you are sharing. Buddha was sharing his experience, not making a demand, sharing experience. He's inspiring them as by his own example. He didn't think this should be the rule, that should be the rule. He experienced that in his space-time functioning as a sentient being, and he experienced the spiritual advantages of doing so. So he recommended this to the monks, and Bhadāli refused that. And if you refuse it in the midst of the sangha, this is the important thing. He didn't go privately to the Buddha and say, "Sir, please forgive me. I'm not able to do it." No, he just rebelled and spoke in the midst of the sangha that he was not going to do that. When the Buddha was announcing and recommending his experience, then he explained that if I do like that, I will have this kukucha and vipatisaro. I would have this kind of remorse and repentance. So here, first, I think we have to feel two things. One is the way that a rule is laid out by the sangha. It also explained to us as historical fact that at the beginning there was not even this kind of rule, but it came into being at a certain stage for a certain reason, and the way it came into being was by way of recommendation, by way of inspiration, not by ways of forcible imposition. This is my rule, this is my sangha, my organization. If you want to be a member, you have to do like that. You want to be my follower, you have to do like. It's not like that. So the Buddha explained himself, how he felt comfort and ease and being light in his physical actions and his body and mind and so on. At the same time, we saw the historical fact that in the Buddha's time, in the very presence of the Buddha, there were these kind of problems. There were intelligent monks who rebelled. Not everybody understood the Buddha's inspiration, and the Buddha's instruction. A good intention. Now this monk certainly did not, right? He didn't want to follow that recommendation, but he had a chance to explain himself. It's very interesting to see his reply also. This is the other part of it. And then you know what the Buddha did? The Buddha didn't say, "Okay, no, you are a bad monk," lock him up, like Trump would have said, "Lock them up, shut them up." No, not like that. The Buddha actually, in front of everybody, said, "Well, okay, if that is the case, why don't you do like this? Whenever you happen to be invited by a householder, you go there and you eat, you sit down and eat one part of your food, ekadesang, one part. And then you carry away the other part, of course, in your bowl. Then you can eat. In that way, you can maintain your body. It's like the Buddha is giving concession to him. That also reflects on the nature of the Vinaya rules. First of all, they are not mechanical. They can be flexible also. And what is important here is that it reflects a consideration of individual problem, individual need. That is a problem of Bhadāli. That's how he felt. That's how he had difficulty. And that's considered by the Buddha. That's considered by the way he teaches. And this is how he functions as a created teacher. He didn't ask other members to just expel him, excommunicate him, not like that. The Buddha in fact said, no, you can, okay, this is your case. We understand your problem. You have, but Buddha recognized it, right? In that case, you can actually eat one part, then you take the other part, and I have seen like that even in my experience. Sri Lanka, I told them partly as a joke, but partly as a fact, and I saw this. There are some monks who actually did like this, and it was accepted. You eat your food and leave some in the bowl, and you can eat later. If that's really your problem, this is a case of individual variation. Our psychology are different. In a way you can interpret that. Our karma is different. Our genes, our chemical, our physical, our cellular compositions are different. Our backgrounds are different, so we have different problems. Sometimes with the best of intention, we have certain problems. And in a way, it's okay also. Because everybody has problems. We think we are better than others if we don't have that kind of problem. But we are not actually better. We just have different problems. We all have greed, hatred, ignorance. Anyway, coming back to this example of Bhadāli, Buddha told him, you can do like that. Huh? And what happened then? Bhadāli again said, sir, sorry, still I cannot do it. Still I will not do it. I'm not going to make effort. I will not do that usaha. Usaha means the effort, that's striving. I will not try to do like this. No. Again, he gave the same answer. The reason is, if I do like that, there will be siya kukuchang, siya vipatisaro. Siya means there might be this regret and remorse. So he was explaining, he was maintaining his individual difficulty or problem within him. He couldn't do that. And he was honest. He didn't pretend to accept and then go back and not to accept. He was honest. He communicated that to the Buddha. He was trying to make the Buddha understand him and make the other Sangha member understood him. Okay, you know what happened? The Buddha didn't say, okay, in that case, then you better stay outside. Not like that. The Buddha left it to him. The Buddha didn't punish him, left it to him. And it is said that for 3 months in the retreat, Bhadāli didn't go near the Buddha into his presence, because that also shows one thing. There are two things, if you like. One is that throughout that period, that's a period that's very important for the Sangha. In a ring retreat, there's a retreat of intensive, serious effort. And monks are expected to follow the recommendations of the Buddha's training, especially more seriously, if you like, more intensely during that period. And it was in this period that when the Buddha was recommending this training rule, this monk disobeyed and openly announced that he was not going to do like this, not going to listen to the Buddha. right? And throughout the 3 months, the Buddha didn't take any action. Let him think, because the Buddha understood him. This is another fact we have to note about the Buddha as a creative teacher. The Buddha noted the individual difficulties, and Buddha gave a chance to the individual. And the Buddha tried to make him understand slowly and gain insight into his own problem. So for 3 months, the Buddha didn't take any action and just kind of quietly forgot about it. But the interesting thing is that Bhadāli must have been thinking, and it shows that the Buddha's approach was right. But Buddha recognized that this person, although acted in a rebellious way, he was a good person, he was a sincere person. You see, when we have difficulty, when someone has difficulties, when someone has conflicts, it doesn't mean that the person is a bad person. Often we miss that part of it. Now, spiritual friend mustn't miss that. This is how the Buddha functions as a true spiritual friend. The student must accept the person as he is, but to help, if there's a way to help the person, and try to help the person. Otherwise, at least accept him. Give him a chance to experience his difficulties. So at the end of the 3 months, the monks were busy preparing robes, you see. The so-called, nowadays you have the katina ceremony, and it's an occasion of inspiration and joy in a way, that the monks have succeeded in yet another period of intensive training for 3 months, and then lived together harmoniously, and then getting ready for the wandering, and actually is a tradition even now, which is a very good tradition, that at the end of that retreat, the monks confess to each other. They confess to each other, one another rather, and please forgive me if I have offended you, and also if I have done something improperly in the Sangha, please forgive me. I'm sincere, I'm trying to confess, Everybody confessed. Everybody means junior to senior, senior to junior. And then everybody is forgiven with kindness. It's a wonderful human experience. Today it's very difficult to see it. It's still there as a custom, but often it becomes mechanical. You chant some Pali words like a formula, and then you don't. Sometimes you don't even think, reflect what you have said, what you are saying, the purpose of it. But certainly not in ancient time. Everything was done with sincerity, and everybody was happy. And understand, yet this is human nature. Everybody has a mystic. Everybody has his or her own individual problems, and then everybody should be given the chance, should be accepted. This is genuine kindness. This is the spirit of Kalanamitta. That was what I was trying to say in my public lecture when I talk about karma also. We don't have it today, and that's why we have problems. We don't have true spiritual fellowship. There's the spirit of true spiritual fellowship. So, it was a very important period. And then the monks were busy making robe. And then the Sutta says that making the robe for the Buddha, thinking that our Lord Buddha or our Buddha will start setting off for his wandering after the robe, the Sivara has been completed. So everybody was doing it with joy, with dedication, with love, with respect, with gratitude to the Buddha. It's a very important part of it, It's not just a formality. It's that feeling. And we need occasion like that. That's why we need to have celebration like that. They're not necessarily celebration in the modern sense. That's why we have some. Like we have Vesak, Buddha's birthday. We have Katina sometimes. We couldn't do it this year for certain reasons. These are not just for the sake of formality. No, we have Sunday gathering. It's not for the sake of formality, so that we have another item or program on our calendar. It's not like that. It's a feeling. It's experience. So the monks were finishing the robe. And very, very important to observe is that then Bhadāli went to these monks. That means that Bhadāli he did not even take part in that robe making for the teacher, that is, i.e., to the Buddha. But the monks were thinking of him with their love and kindness. And then the monks say, look, you take this robe that we have made, this is being made for the Buddha, you take it and give it to the Buddha. How touching. You know, the group of monks who did the robe didn't claim any credit for themselves and give it to Bhadāli, who didn't even take part in that process, and give him a chance to see the Buddha, to confess Buddha, because there's a time of confession. Can you see the significance of that occasion? They gave him a chance. Say, look, you better pay attention carefully. Sadhukang manasi karohi. Better pay attention carefully about your fault. Whatever wrongdoing you have done, if you understand it, you better think about it. How interesting. You better get yourself punished or something like that. Pay attention carefully, your mind to it. Go to the Buddha with this robe, offer to the Buddha, and pay attention to your fault. In other words, what they want to say is, you go and get forgiveness from the Buddha, so that let there not be a greater difficulty for you. You know, we have difficulties and we don't pay attention, the difficulty become bigger and bigger, to the extent that it become a true problem and we cannot solve it anymore. You know, so he was given a chance, and clearly this is the spirit of spiritual fellowship in the Sangha. First, he was not rejected, not only by the Buddha, but even by other members. And they still think of him, they give him a chance, they help him, they encourage him, they give him an occasion. They make the robe and pass on the robe to him and ask him to take it to the Buddha and confess, you know. They didn't force him to confess. They said, you just think about in your mind carefully about your fault. And just be mindful, do not let your fault become bigger and bigger and become a bigger to character, you know, a bigger difficulty for you. So Bhadāli went there and confessed to the Buddha. And now it's very interesting. He says, Bhante, please accept my fault as a fault. Please accept my fault as a fault for the sake of my future restraint. First, we see this monk actually is a good monk, a sincere human being, sincere monk, and the Buddha saw it, and Buddha was correct. And the other monks, other fellow spirit friends also saw it, and they were correct. That nobody rejected him. They still loved him and gave him a chance. If he had not been a good person, he would not have been thinking over for 3 months, you know. Then came to the conclusion that, yeah, I have made a mistake. Asking the Buddha to forgive him. So that means that he had gained insight now, by that time, into his own behavior. That insight is not forced onto him. Yeah? And then you see the Bhagava Achayato Padikanhatu Ayating Samvaraya. That means the fortunate one, that is the Buddha, please accept, that means please forgive this Achaya as an Achaya. Please forgive this, my transgression as a transgression. Transgression is a transgression. Now, this is a kind of a idiomatic way of expressing in the Sangha. This is also very important. Don't take it lightly. That means that that means the essence of you can see the essence of a Buddhist confession there. It's not out of fear. It's not out of obedience. I have to obey the Buddha. Now finally I decide to obey. Not like that. It's not I fear because if I don't confess, I'll be rejected by my group, by other members, by my teacher, the Buddha. No, not like that. Not out of fear, not out of authority, not out of demand, not even out of guilt in that sense. But inside, the acharya as acharya, as acharya, acharya told me as acharya, as the fault as a fault, the transgression as transgression. That means that as means indicates awareness, mindfulness, acceptance. I'm confessing it because I know it's a fault. I accept that it's a fault. I've gained insight into my fault. And then this is for ayating means in future, samvaraya, for the sake of my restraint, not for the sake of, so that I continue my membership here. I continue to be your disciple. I have to do it. And then I become, again, respectable and accepted by other colleagues. Not like that. You do the confession for a very rational reason. This is rational confession. And that is, you want to have restraint for yourself. You say, accept this acharya as an acharya, this confession as confession. I mean, I have true awareness, I have true understanding, I truly accept it myself. I want it to be seen like that, to be understood like that. Not because I fear you as a Buddha. The whole essence of confession is seen in those few words. Very, very important. Of course, I'm going to share you with the story later. The Buddha accepted him and explained to him, but that is a later story. We have not finished that sutta. But then coming back to just one point, that the reply by Bhadāli to the Buddha when he 2 times he repeated himself to explain why I'm not going to make an effort. I'm not going to try to do like this. He said, lest there be remorse and regret. Now this is also important for, if you like, Buddhist psychology, you see. And I often say that certain experiences, certain situations, they become problem and we begin to suffer when we interpret in a certain way. Given the same situations, same act, one person does not feel negatively and does not suffer. Another person feel negative and suffer, even in the case of so-called traumatic experiences. A simple example, I don't want to get involved too much in other emotional problem, but just one very simple problem. For instance, the wartime situation, in a war, you see some children in a war-torn country, and some people will grow up and just, it was just part of their experience in childhood, and they become a happy person. And when they grow up, they have a happy family, they have happy life, and they had certain hardship, they had certain difficulty in the wartime when they were a child, when they were children, So they didn't experience the so-called traumatic experience that way. But some others were experienced, and later on, I suffer like that, in a war-torn situation. I was deprived of my childhood, I didn't have my childhood, my childhood was stolen, and all these concepts came into it, and then the person began to suffer. Especially, I would say, if that person, that child, happens to go to a place like maybe, say America or Western culture, everybody thinks that way, you also think that way, then you're going to interpret your kind of retrospection, in that way, you're going to have problems. That's why I read certain reports by certain researchers to the effect that, their so-called traumatic experiences, when they become a painful experience, or the people begin to suffer only when they look back and then they interpret it that way. They need not be interpreted that way. So just imagine that if you are from a different culture, different background, different mentality, You don't think of a certain situation. You don't understand situation from the way that this modern Western culture, the total different culture. They're not that other culture not necessarily wrong either. By the way, I do not mean that, but it's a different culture, different interpretation, right? You want to borrow the interpretation into your case. You import the very structure, import the interpretation. You import at the same time those problems into your culture. This often happens. Of course, there are also other factors. Some there are differences, the factor of individual differences in individual. Two persons, even the same sickness, for one person the sickness becomes serious. For another person, the sickness doesn't even show up. The effect. We might say it's also due to karma. If you want to add that part of it, but then even in terms of physical and mental composition, you can see that individuals differ. For one person is a problem, another person is not. I have seen people like this, children of the same situation. For one person, there's no problem. But another person, he makes a problem of himself, become a serious problem. So it's like this. So in the case of Bhadāli also, he felt that if I do like that, I'm going to, maybe later on I will regret I shouldn't have suffered, as a monk. I didn't have chance to eat good food. I couldn't enjoy food as a human being. This is my basic human right. And you might have that kind of value structure, maybe from the West or from a so-called education. And now I realize I'm deprived, then you begin to suffer. This is called remorse in that sense. You didn't look at that in another perspective, like, when I was a child, I had the opportunity to live a simpler life, and it was a good training for me. You didn't look at it. You look at it from another different context, different culture. Then you get into problems. So if Bhadāli had that kind of problem, then he should be understood and accepted. The Buddha left it there to him. And then the Buddha transformed him slowly. And then the Buddha was able to transform him also, look at this, because of the context of the environment, using, if you like, Carl Rogers' term. Because of the context of spiritual fellowship, because he was not excommunicated, he was not rejected, he was accepted, he was loved, continued to be loved, and concerned by other fellow beings. They gave him a chance, they encouraged him, they teach him, this is how you must do now. This is the time to confess and think carefully. Even they didn't impose on him, you are wrong, you have been bad. No wording like that in the suttas. They say, think carefully about your dosa. Dosa kang, sadhu kang, manasi karohi. Your fault, think carefully, apply your mind carefully. So that, and then he said, so let it not be dukkhatarang, dukkaratarang. Let it not be a greater difficulty for you. If you don't think carefully now, you don't get insight, it will become a bigger problem, I told you, for instance, by the way, another simple example. I had a colleague in Sri Lanka, and who was a monk. When he was young, he was a novice, and he was intelligent. I told you that story, right? And he was very intelligent, and he studied well, and then he got a scholarship. He went to the West and he got a PhD, But of course, when he was studying PhD, already he disrobed. Actually, there's no problem with disrobing. By the way, I think Buddhism doesn't impose on the young ones. And then once you take up the robe, you must commit. Because especially the young ones, they didn't know what it meant to take up the robe. It's not their fault. And if there are psychology changes, then it's perfectly fine, as long as the person remains as a happy human being, and hopefully the person is training as a monk or novice and contribute to society. So I fully accept it. You shouldn't, like in the case of the Bhadāli Sutta, Patanjali was not demanded by the Buddha, you must live like this, you must follow my example of eating only once a day. Not like that. No must, but it was recommended to you. But if you felt different way, it is your psychology, it is your difficulty, and it should be understood. So there is nothing wrong, and it's fully acceptable. But anyway, coming back to this example, I wouldn't reject my colleague like this just because he was a young monk. He got all the chances in the Sangha, And now he got a scholarship. He got a Fulbright scholarship, by the way. So see how intelligent he was, and he was very good in English. He went to the West and he got his PhD. But the only thing that I cannot accept is that it's fine, perfectly fine he this road, but then he got totally conditioned and influenced by the Western culture and things like in those times. That is where he went wrong. Yeah. Then actually when he came back, he began to tell us, oh, you can't understand Buddhism unless you know Western philosophy. So Buddhism must be understood. The Buddha's teaching must be understood, right? From the perspective of Western philosophy, that's where it became damaging. Not because he disrobed, not at all. And then the other thing is, for himself, I feel sorry for him. Because he felt, when he was a monk, when he was a novice, he was deprived of human rights. He couldn't drink, he couldn't go to the pubs, he couldn't go to the clubs, he couldn't touch women and things like that, you see. So his behavior totally changed. It's like a rebellion to himself. That person began to womanize, and he was fond of drinking, and justifying that I couldn't have a chance to drink now. He thought that he thought that even I can hide and drink. Once he told me that. There are wines given to me, but I don't drink it, but given to me so that I can give to others, maybe. Anyway, so like this. So he began to feel, I have suffered, I have been deprived of my childhood, and like that, you see. And he began to reject his whole own culture. He thought it was smarter than others, colleagues. This is where it became damaging. So this is kind of so-called kukucha vipatisaro, that the Bhadāli said, I might, if I follow this discipline. Imagine that it's just one rule about eating, but then eating is a very important part of human existence anyway. But you can extend it. In the case of that colleague of mine, it's about his whole life as a monk who training. So you see, of course, I'm very happy to observe that I must add one footnote if you like, that in recent years and after a long time I met him again, and once I met him here, he seemed to have changed actually. He seemed to have, he's not so critical of his own tradition now. He began to appreciate his own tradition. This is wonderful, this is great. Anyway, just like that, you see how we can be so damaged by this conditioning from a modern Western culture without even thinking. We don't become aware of it. In the case, maybe he was a very intelligent person, and then later on he realized it, maybe, which is of course a good thing. So we learn so much from that small sutta. To summarize, about how rules came to being, the very nature of this so-called disciplinary rule, what is the purpose of it? And the Buddha's teaching, and also equally important, is the Buddha teaching as a spiritual teacher, a creative teacher, what it means. He's able to bring about a transformation in a person through his method of inspiration. This is what it means when we say that he is a creative teacher. His method is a method of inspiration, not method of authoritarian hierarchy. Yeah, and then we also saw in the confessions the very nature of Buddhist confession, not based on fear, not based on authority. We also see the Buddhist psychology you see, of certain experience difficulties, and how it can be damaging if you have this kind of so-called regret, if you don't understand, you don't have understanding. We also saw spiritual the working of spiritual fellowship, right? In respect of the other members of the spiritual community. This is what a spiritual community should be. The example where Bhadāli was, the Sangha in which he was. He was not rejected, he was accepted, he was loved, he was given a chance, he was helped to overcome his difficulty, and he will help to gain insight. He will help to be of himself, he will help to be transformed. The Buddha helped him, the spiritual friend helped him. That's why he was able for him, for Bhadāli, to gain insight finally, and we saw the human nature, you see, that in fact such a person must have been a very sincere person. But he was successfully transformed through the creative teaching of the Buddha as a creative teacher, through the contact of spiritual fellowship. So there are many things to learn, and I will continue to share with you this sutta, and we have only done one part of it in our class. Okay. I think that's enough for today.